Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Sorry, I was kind of enjoying my background music. I think you'll probably find it familiar. A little bit of Danse Macabre from Camille Saint-Saëns, which I felt was appropriate for today's topic. We're actually going to talk about something that was suggested by one of our viewers. A good subject. I wanted me to give my Omnist take on art and memetics, which is basically the evolution of culture, which you would say are pretty related concepts and very near and dear to my heart. Let's see. This is a little bit much. Let's just tone that right out. Completely. Let's see if we can leave it at 1%. It still gives me inspiration. Okay, so before we begin, let's start with definitions. Because, as you may be aware, how we define things has a lot to do with how we perceive them. Okay, so let's talk about art. What is art? I'm going to give you the Omnist definition, my definition, which is, if you've been following my channel, my perspective. You may have a different perspective. You may disagree with me. That's fine. That's joy to an Omnist, a chance for a discussion, a chance for a sharing of perspectives that maybe gives us a way to come up with a better perspective. To me, art is basically the representation of a point of view through visual or auditory or multimedia means. So from that broad definition, art is basically any means of expression. When you go have a conversation with your neighbor, you're essentially creating a bit of art. And their reaction to that expression makes them the audience of that art, and an art with an audience is a performance. So essentially, this is a very much more broad definition of art than you're probably used to coming across. And it may take a little time for that to sink in, but if you don't let that sink in, you're not going to understand what I'm talking about. So I'll leave that there. Memetics is a fancy word which coincidentally has the same root as meme. Is basically what they've decided to call the study of the evolution of culture. And culture is essentially what results from art. And given the broad definition I've made, I think you'll understand that that is absolutely true. All culture is the result of art, is the result of expression, is the result of sharing expression with others and proselytizing our point of view. Okay, which leads to the next unfolding of my thoughts on art and culture, that there are basically two sources of passion that drive art. One source is the need to feel accepted, to feel appreciated by the culture you're in. Okay? If you create your art, your expression, based upon a desire to please, to fit in, to be part of a ruling or wannabe ruling group, you will create your art with that bias. And for most artists, that is most individual souls who are incarnated in human bodies. That's the level of art that you participate in. There is another level that you may not be aware of, and it's inspirational. Okay? There is another source of art that comes from some sort of revelation of a point of view that is maybe different from the conventional and the accepted point of view, but inspires you to create something. And, well, I think this backdrop that I've got and the music I chose gives you an idea of what that is. The artist that painted this picture, I'm not sure exactly who it is, but I liked it and I typed it for background, had a very definite idea of a vision. To many people, it may look like the vision of a maniac, of a raving lunatic, or just a pretty picture that, oh gosh, that's a great artist that thought up all that stuff. But those thoughts that led to the production of that art were inspirational. They were the essence of how the spiritual world talks to the physical world. Okay, now some of your New Age believers will call this, oh, this is the message from my higher self. Okay, if you're of the persuasion that the whole universe is one big cosmic oneness consciousness, then okay, knock yourself out. Your higher self is God, which is you, which experiencing God through my body. Okay, that's one way of viewing things, and it's not an unhelpful view. It can be just as useful as any other religion, but it's not the truth. The truth is that we are all individual souls with our own thoughts, our own experiences, our own series of incarnations that form our character and our individual uniqueness, our individual art, our individual expression. Okay? So, the higher self that inspires can be any of the spiritual energies of other souls who happen to be associated with you and happen to be in a position to guide you. How does that happen? Well, at any given time, some souls are very busy in an incarnation, living out life as a human being, for instance, living out life as a black hole, living out life as a rat or a mole, living out life as an idea. Everything that we can experience in the physical world is empowered by a soul that represents the idea of that thing manifested. Now, some soul vessels are very simple and don't really do much artistically. Others are surprisingly artistic. If you look at the plant world, they're really good at creating art. The animal world, well, maybe not so much. Oftentimes, all we can do is imitate nature and not even get close to that. But there's this desire, this innate desire of all souls for expression, for being understood, for understanding themselves. This is why we talk to ourselves, to get to know ourselves better, to get affirmation, or just to have a good argument. And because the human body is made up of a lot of organs, a lot of cells. Each of those has its own means of expression, its own art. The art of a cell is functioning properly in its specialized role. And when it's not functioning properly, when its art has gone haywire, when it's gone crazy, it can make you sick. That's the expression of a cell. A damaged cell is basically a cell that has gone crazy, effectively. This is the other aspect of art which feeds into culture, is art is not necessarily good. Art can cause evil. And both of these kinds of arts can cause evil. The art that says that I create trying to make myself more valuable to society, fit in better. This is basically how propaganda works. And propaganda is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a way of preserving or gaining power. And much of the art that we see, we consume, is geared towards wanting to have cultural power. Now, there are artists out there who are just inspired by a desire to express something that they see uniquely has value to them. So they write a science fiction novel. So they create a fantastic painting. Whatever it happens to be, they create some content, and that's become very easy to do now. And this is all expression of art. If it doesn't appeal to people, if it doesn't get likes and views, then that can be damaging to the person. It's like, yeah, people don't appreciate what I do. They don't like my art. And that can be very hurtful. And this creates a lot of pressure in this modern age where, social media is basically a venue for creating art, for creating expression. And it's pointing out the fact that everybody has an incredible ability to influence. That scares some people. And other people, they see it as an opportunity. So, basically social media is kind of changing the rules of the game technologically for this species. And that's essentially what the whole background of humanity has been about. Let's take it back to the earliest recorded history. I'm talking about what we call mythology. If you look at the background myths and so forth of every culture, they all talk about a time where there were powerful beings that perhaps participated in creating our species, making the leap from a bipedal animal with behavior not that different from pack animals like cats or dogs, to one that actually can consciously create art, create expression. How did that happen? And who were these so-called gods? And who were their gods? This is getting to the essence of the omnist point of view. And that is that ultimately the search for God, for the source of all power, lies in the spiritual realm, lies in the realm of thought. Who was the first thinker? Or was there a first thinker? Perhaps The soul that we identify as the first creator was not necessarily the first creator, but just the first one that created things that didn't drive them crazy and result in them committing soul suicide. Now, the soul is an immortal thing for most part, but if I was going to be a soul that wanted to create a system that was built upon making more souls and distributing the processing of creation, which is the omnis view of the creator, the first creator, I would want to retain some sort of fail-safe system. And this is what I call the cosmic veto. Okay? The first creator created a system that allows us souls to grow up through incarnation in different soul vehicles. One of the most interesting of which are species like humanity that's capable of conceptualizing the creation of art. Now, did this physical world of reincarnation and karma always exist? No. No. In the beginning, the entire multiverse was spiritual, was a realm of thought, of gods thinking about what they could be, wanted to be, whatever they imagined. And it was only at the point that some bright soul came up with the idea of, you know what, we're having all these wonderful ideas and having these huge family discussions about what truth is and what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. And frankly, we can never get anywhere because there's no real way to test those ideas. In the realm of pure thought, where anything can exist, anything can be true, there's no mechanism to discern what is useful truth and what is some truth that should be maybe discarded. And at some point, one of these thought artists came up with this bright idea of creating this physical world where souls could experience the limitation of living within a set of rules. Essentially, a government. And so this is, again, why I'm going to be talking a lot about government and culture and spirituality in the same breath, because you cannot separate them. The entire history of creation has been one of souls trying to figure out how to govern themselves. And how does that relate to humanity? Well, okay, so back in the dim, dark, distant past, before there was any creative human, the earth governed itself according to the laws of nature. The laws of nature are the laws of the spiritual creators, not God. Yes, God, as the first creator, the one who perhaps had the first idea of making this physical testing ground, you might envision that soul as God. You might envision God as being the soul whose opinions came to dominate the world of the spirit, and whose vote was therefore worth a bit more than everybody else's when it was decided what experiments to keep and what to throw out. I'm not presuming to tell you exactly how it all laid out, but I can tell you the shape of creation. And you can see the shape of creation all around you in the fractal multiverse, in the patterns that repeat, in the patterns that die out. Creation is all about defining patterns and testing them to see if they're better than the previous pattern. This is the essence of the science of creation, which anybody who's deeply involved in product development, especially for computer chips and stuff like that, which I happen to have some experience in, which is maybe how I was inspired to tie all these ends of art and technology together, knows that if you want to make something new, what do? Well, you got to get funding for the idea. Okay, funding for spiritual ideas comes from spiritual energy. Where does spiritual energy come from? Comes from performing your art before others and selling them on the idea. And that's basically how gods work. Gods in training work. And every human incarnated soul is, to one extent or another, a god in training. Some of them, still in their diapers and having to go potty every 2 seconds and making a lot of mistakes, and others who are pretty far advanced down this game. And thus you have some creators on social media who are very influential and others who are not. And you have some influential creators who are imposing their viewpoint upon others and censoring the viewpoint of those who challenge them. And there are others who are challenging them. And there are many, many different polarities of these challenges, because basically a perspective, an individual perspective, is your personal religion. What you believe. What you believe is important. What you believe is the order of things. And there's no one right answer to that for every soul. That's why no religion ever became universal, no matter how much the believers in it tried to conquer everybody else and force it down their throat. And in this sense, remember, when I talk about religion, I'm talking about ideology too. I'm talking about the idea of a nation, the idea of a city, the idea of any organization of human endeavor is to some extent a religion. Every individual soul's life is the practice of a religion. Every incarnation we take, and we do it voluntarily. Nobody is forced to go, I'm gonna go send you to Earth to be punished for a while. That's not how it works. That's how it can feel. If you don't really understand karma and you don't understand the game of souls, what's really going on here. Let's see, where do we want to go from there? I sure wish I had somebody asking questions. I'd really much rather be doing this in a dialogue format. It's much more fun to have a discussion about something than to be preached to. I don't have a lot of desire to be a preacher, even though I'm very passionate about religion. Anyway, I think that gives you a sense of what I see and how it applies to the modern world. In terms of cultural evolution, then, what you see in human history is basically two forces at work. One force is the one that's most visible, is how existing powers, existing forces, existing political forces use art as a means of control, as a means of inspiration, as a means of trying to create a workable society. And, you know, any student of history can see that that's been a mixed bag of success. Some ideas work pretty well, others not so. Let's talk about some of those artistic inventions. Democracy. If you know anything about the origins of democracy, you know something about the city-state of Athens and its relationship with the rest of Greece, and Greece's relationship with the rest of the world when the Greek way of thinking became a power to be reckoned with. That was a power to be reckoned with in Athens, but one city-state has a hard time exerting a lot of influence, even if it's the perfect democracy. It is going to have a hard time asserting its influence over everybody else. And if you studied the rise and fall of the Athenian Empire, yes, it was an empire. Even though it wasn't called that, even though it didn't have an emperor, at one point, Athens exerted its dominance, its influence over a good portion of the Mediterranean area. And there was a lot of resentment over that. Even though, to our lights, you know, this democracy, which had all this new culture and all of these great philosophers and playwrights and this and that, I mean, we owe so much to the Athenian democracy, to the Athenian empire. And yet, it was very flawed. And its biggest flaw, its cardinal sin, was democracy. The idea that we give some group of people the right to decide everything for everybody else without understanding that any group of people are individual souls at very, very different points in their path as souls. This is something that people just cannot deal with, the fact that we are not all born equal. You're born with, in the inherent knowledge, we don't remember all our past lives, but we have the effect of those lives on our character. And that's why, I mean, I'm a perfect example. In a family of 5, I'm the deep thinker. I'm the mystic. I've got an older brother who thinks he is, but is one of the most self-centered and egotistical and caustic people that I can say I've ever met. He's driven all his family away from him. He's driven away, finally, a devoted wife of some 50 years, and is in a very, very dark place spiritually. Very intelligent person, he was way ahead of me spiritually for most of his life, and was kind of my mentor, my inspiration when I was young. He's the one that got me into classical music. He's the one that sort of taught me that not conforming was okay. He also taught me that you can get in a hell of a lot of trouble not conforming and just doing whatever you wanted. My other siblings each have their own unique characteristics, and I never understood that. I thought, you think, oh, it's because Mama and Papa favored this one, or they did that, or they messed up on the first child and then learned how to do better. No, that's bullshit. Each child is an individual. Starts out as an individual, always will be an individual. There's no one magic pill for raising children. And there's no one magic religion for controlling a population. It's just not possible. And if we'd stop trying to force square pegs in round holes and make everybody eat the same dog food, the same God food, we'd be able to get along with each other a lot better. Now, just continuing this thought about the art of government. Anyone who has studied history has, from a economic and political standpoint and spiritual, would come away realizing that the best governments devised are those that have a hierarchy that places power in the right place. Okay, so there are so many things that are best dealt with on an individual or a family level or a community level. And there are other things that you have to deal with at a higher level. But I can tell you for absolutely sure, no matter how big or how perfect you try to make a government, especially a world government or a superpower government, it is going to devolve into a dystopian, totalitarian autocracy. And that's what's happened in the US. That's what they've got in China. That's what globalists want to bring to the entire world. And okay, it's an artistic idea. It's a very appealing image, but it's not going to work. It's fundamentally incompatible with the reality of the human species. Now, could it be compatible with other species? Of course. And we see examples of that in nature. Look at ants and bees, hive species. They're very stable. They're very internally peaceful. But if you've ever seen a hive of ants meet another hive, or a bunch of bees meet the servants of another queen, you ought to have a pretty good impression of how fragile these kind of systems are. And there's no better example of that fragility than what's going on right now with the bee populations, the colony collapse disorder. Okay? Hive-minded organizations are not very adaptable, and they are incredibly xenophobic. Anything challenges them, it's seen as an enemy. So, what are some of the best ways of organizing that humanity has come up with? Well, after the failure of democracy, a rather famous fellow named Plato conceived of an idea called a republic. Now, what's the difference between a republic and a democracy? Democracy, in its pure form, is the rule of the many. The will of the masses rules. Now that sounds like a great thing because I'm part of the masses. The problem is that a large fraction of these masses are not very advanced souls. They're easily misled by Pied Pipers of ideology. And let's look at the case of Athens. What happened to this wonderful Athenian democracy? Well, it started to be dominated by the voices that the people would listen to the most, which tended to be demagogues who wanted to pump up their own agenda. And these demagogues, the people that were most listened to, were actually the scions of the old nobility. Maybe the bastard branch, who, oh gosh, great uncle so and so has 600 ships and I've only got one, and I feel like a disappointed Athenian age millionaire. And therefore, I'm going to go get up in the assembly and the democracy and say, this is unfair. We need to change this. We can do better than this. We need to take all the ships from this guy and give them to the public navy. And then we need to go and invade Syracuse because they support the Spartans, even though the war is not actively going. But we know the Spartans still hate us. And a demagogue like this was responsible for talking the Athenians into the stupidest ventures you can imagine. Invading Egypt was one of the failed enterprises, and then the one that did them in finally was sending almost their entire fleet and most of their manpower off to Sicily to support an ally that was in conflict with an ally of Sparta and Syracuse. This was maybe the original proxy war. Okay? They had agreed to a peace, but the demagogues didn't like that because in war, there's opportunity. All the same, you'll see repeating again. Again, this is how the divine fractal works. Patterns repeat until better patterns replace them. So where did this idea of republic lead to? Led to the Roman Republic. And that was one of the most stable and successful governments for quite a while. Was able to get through some incredibly difficult times. The invasion of the Celts. Was able to assert itself over the entire Italian peninsula. But it ran out of gas. Why? Because things changed. Because the essence of a successful republic is division of power. A set of checks and balances that make sure no one's power gets out of hand. And no one feels underrepresented in the system. No one feels that there's things going on behind the scenes that are deciding events and taking away what influence any individual feels they should have on events. And when a republic fails, when too much power gets concentrated in too few hands that are, pursuing some selfish oligarchic agenda, well, all it takes is a populist figure to overthrow it. A Hitler, a Napoleon, or an ideology spread by folks like Marx and the adherents Lenin, Trotsky, and the opportunists who don't even believe in Marxism, like Mao. Chairman Mao. The Chinese Communist Party is hardly Marxist at all. It just uses the ideology to promote Chinese nationalism. And the Western media has latched onto it to promote crony globalism. Commercialist rule of the planet by a corporate meritocracy. And you see just how dangerous that is when you look at how this pandemic started. The collusion, the cover-up, the profiteering, the lies that are still being told about What's really going on, I'm not going to get into more detail than that because there's plenty of content out there that you can explore. I'm just saying that this is a failure of government in the same ways it's failed before. Republics do work, but they need a good set of checks and balances. And our favorite republic of today, the USA, is failing because the Constitution did not take into account the rise of corporatism. When corporations first came into existence, they only existed under the charter of some sovereign government. The Dutch East India Company was a charter of the Dutch government. The British West India Company, or whatever they called it, was a charter from the British government. It had specific terms that it was allowed to operate within, a limited time that it was allowed to operate, and it had to be very transparent. And even then, those corporations became uncontrollable by their governments and took on a life of their own, to the extent that what was the Dutch East India Company became far more powerful than the Dutch government, and resulted in, I mean, this is why imperialism fails, right? It's because it's a corporate effort. It's got no connection with what's good for the nation that has the empire. And that's exactly what happened with the Roman Empire. It served the interests of greedy, grasping individuals who didn't appreciate what they'd created. This engine of culture, this engine of progress. And when you stop appreciating what works and just start attacking it because it's not working, empires collapse. This is what's happening to the United States right now. And it's what's happening to China, too, right before your eyes. It's collapsing. You can't sustain an authoritarian, a totalitarian government. A government where all the important decisions are made behind closed doors. Where elections are as much a farce as the NFL, as a sporting event. And that's the point at which we've gotten to in the U.S. and much of the rest of the world. The UN is a joke. It's built upon decent ideals, and the idea was to make some body that could provide global governance, but it's completely riddled with corporate influence and backroom dealing and money laundering. This is the truth. And it's not some grand conspiracy. It's basically human nature. Because most humans cannot grok the fact that they have a soul. They don't want to admit the truth of reincarnation and karma, because that would mean that you have to take responsibility for what you're doing, and you're going to pay for it in another life. And ambitious people, materialistic people, don't like to hear that. They don't like to hear that there's some force that is going to rein them in. They want to do the best for their family and make sure their kids are masters of the universe. This is the truth of all families. Human families are nepotistic. They want to do good for their family. They want to do good for their friends. And the more power you have, the more that's going to drive you to autocratic behavior to self-destructive behavior. Because the moment you think that your life or the lives of the people you love are more important, more valuable than anybody else's, you are essentially committing the only cardinal sin there is in the multiverse of de-souling other souls. And, that's a sin everybody makes. You can't avoid it. This is the silliness of extreme Buddhism or the Jain sect. Oh, I can't step on an ant because I'm going to hurt my karma. I've got to sit in the corner and put out my begging bowl so everybody else can take all the karma and I don't have to take any so I can be enlightened. This is insane. Every time you take a breath, you are pulling organisms into your body that you're going to either process and consume, or who might invade you and start the process of consuming you. You want to eat only plants? Okay, plants have souls too. Plants have feelings. They cry. I've heard them. They're a little bit more grown up about it than animals. Well, actually, most animals understand that. If you really ever get to know a deer, they know that things are hunting them. They know they're probably going to get killed by a bullet or by a mountain lion or whatever, or they're going to catch a disease or get lamed by making a bad leap and getting eaten by. It's the nature of the beast, and they don't mind that. Because innately, simpler souls like that understand that this is just one lifetime in a cycle. And if you got a chance to talk to the average plant or animal that's being consumed, all they would tell you is, I just want to know that my life was meaningful, that it was useful, and it was appreciated. And this is the essence of why we've been taught to say a blessing over a meal. It's not to thank God. It's to thank the souls that contributed to putting that meal in front of you, that contributed to your having another day to pursue your dreams. To the extent those dreams are valuable, that's the worth of that meal. If you consume just because you want to carry on your genetic material, you're consuming in a soulless manner. Because DNA has nothing to do with spirituality other than the fact that DNA is a mechanism that the senior spiritual creators designed to make it easier to set up new experiments in this physical world, to set the conditions that they needed to try to prove a point. And that's all it's about. Yes, you develop relationships with the souls that come from your DNA. It's not because of the DNA. It's because souls are interacting. And over the course of many lives, you are going to develop relationships with a lot of souls. You're going to have a lot of children. You're going to have a lot of parents. And that's great. That's wonderful. That's a great way to develop relationships, and that's an important part of incarnation. But it's not the be-all, end-all of existence. And until people start realizing that, and start acting like souls instead of ravenous bodies who are completely consumed with trying to carry on their DNA, humanity is not going to be ready to interact with the more intelligent species out there, the more spiritual species. Because you're acting like a virus when you behave like that. When you have the mindset that your survival is the only thing important, and of course we all want to live forever, unless we really know what's coming. I'm actually, once you really understand reincarnation and karma, and you have a good idea of what your mission was in this life, and you've reached the point where, you know what, I think I've accomplished my mission, unless something else comes along. It's pretty tempting to just go ahead and say, well, time to recycle. I've thought about it myself. Truth is, this is a really interesting time, and I want to wait around and see what happens. But when death comes knocking at my door, it will be welcome. Because I know what's coming. I know what I've done with this life. I have a pretty good idea of what I've done with a lot of other lives. And I'm happy with myself. Am I perfect? Far from it. Am I never going to make any mistakes again? No. I can guarantee I will. All souls do. And that's why all souls reincarnate, even gods. Gods most of all, because they have the most power to make mistakes, the most spiritual influence. They have the most powerful art. And so if you see it that way, you'll see that art, the expression of spiritual power, is a far more important currency than money. It's a far more important currency than life. That's why people are willing to die for a cause. Because they see something that is more important than their own life. They're willing to commit to a cause that is bigger than them. Now, that's not always a great thing. Because if that cause they're being committed to is serving an agenda that is inconsistent with the agenda of maintaining life on this planet, maintaining the existence of humanity, well, that might be considered sort of bad. Unless the existence of humanity is a danger to the greater multiverse. And there are some species out there that do believe that humankind is dangerous and needs to be exterminated. Needs to be vaccinated from the multiverse. And I can tell you that that agenda involves beings that are not from this planet. Beings that are aware of how species get chosen and have been the chosen species before for previous big cosmic experiments like the Gaia experiment. And they want to make sure that humanity doesn't get a chance to be the chosen ones again, because they haven't had much fun living through the time that humanity has taken to figure out what it wanted to be when it grew up. And what humanity has been about, if you look at our history, it's about removing spiritual power from a species after raising them to the level that they can appreciate it, that they've seen spiritual power at work and have recorded it, have a history of gods, of prophets still getting divine inspiration that can't be ignored because there's just so many instances of it. And if you don't believe me, just go take a look at the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson on actual proof of reincarnation because of the leaks in reincarnation amnesia that happen with some young children. You cannot deny it. There is so much overwhelming evidence. So once you accept reincarnation is true, which it is, then go start looking at people who have become adept at past life regression. Look at the work of Dolores Cannon. Not her disciples who are using her findings for a woke agenda. You need to temper this with the understanding that any technique for accessing spiritual knowledge is subject to charlatanry. And there are many charlatans out there trying to push a certain spiritual agenda that they think is going to make the world a better place. And this again gets back to this whole discussion of two types of art. There's art that is driven by a desire for power, a desire for keeping or gaining power or shifting power, and there is art that is driven by truth, by simply, this is my experience. Dolores Cannon, if you listen to her, she has the latter type of art. She has a gift. She was given a gift to be able to come up with this hypnosis therapy that, in the hands of a really good practitioner, can dredge up the most interesting details of your past lives. But it can be misused too, and is being misused by many of its practitioners. Just as other methods of accessing the spiritual, like psychedelic plants, can easily be misused by the people who administer them to assert their view of the game of power. So take that for what it's worth. I hope that was useful. I hope I didn't say anything in this segment that's going to get me banned, or I think I'm already shadow banned in a lot of ways. That's okay. When the information is needed, it will find a way to get out. That's my feeling about inspiration, about the inspiration that you get when you're having a potential Messiah life. And I am absolutely certain I've had a Messiah life. I don't know what I'm the Messiah of or where it's leading to, but I know when I die that I'm going to see the heavens from a whole new perspective. And I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, Rob Trump with the Omnist Hour. Thank you for listening. Like, share, subscribe. Throw darts at me, whatever you want. Knock yourself out. Love you guys. Bye.